So let's start marking. The first thing you're going to need to do is grab some marking pencils. I'm going to use two different ones. So I like this ceramic marking pencil for anything that's going to be medium or dark. So my black background and then all of the colors except for the yellow is going to work great for this pencil. And this is really simple. It just marks and then erases off with the eraser. I do find that generally by the time I stitch over the line, the mark is nearly erased completely. And I just have to do just a little bit of a touch up with the eraser just to remove all the rest of the marks. Now for light fabrics, and if you used a light background, you're going to need to use this. It's a water-soluble blue pen. And this is what I use to mark in that yellow. Now, these are a little tricky and a lot of people get confused about using these. The blue marks wash out completely in water. And a lot of times quilters will just spray the surface of the quilt trying to get the marks to remove. And that's just going to disperse it. That's not going to actually erase it. So what you have to do if you use a water-soluble blue pen, you have to submerge your quilt. You have to actually soak it or throw it in the washing machine to get the marks out completely. So please keep that in mind. And do test your marking pens and pencils before you use them on your fabric. There's nothing worse than having marking pens and the marks on your quilt not erased. That's meant to be the mystery, the magic act. We put these pretty marks on, we stitch over them, and then they're supposed to disappear. That's how it works. So make sure to test on some scrap fabric just so that you're sure it's going to come out. Okay, so let's get started marking. You can see I've already done straight lines through this entire prism area where we've got our rainbow of colors. I've also marked a straight line here along the outer red points. And this is important. This is how I'm going to break up the space. Basically what we're saying is we're saying this area has straight lines in it. That's one section of the quilt. And then the background here between those lines, that's another section of the quilt that's getting quilted with a different design. That's being quilted with matrix. So you can see that beautiful wiggly grid that we're going to be adding to the quilt. So that's the mentality that I come to whenever I'm breaking up a quilt like this, is where are the sections and how can we define that? And you could define this in different ways. You know, you could stitch in the ditch if you wanted to, instead of stitching a straight line through there. It's totally up to you. You could stitch a wiggly line if you wanted to as well. Really, there's so many different options. This is the fun thing about quilting design, is there's so many different things that we can quilt on our quilts. It's almost overwhelming once you start realizing just how many different designs there are and how many different textures you can create. Then it's just a matter of, you know, really just kind of picking which one you like best. Okay, so I'm coming down here, marking a straight line that just hits all of those red points, just like that. And the straight lines are really simple. You basically just take your ruler and line it up with those points. And I just, you know, kind of look at each one, making sure that the edge of the ruler is lined up with that. And that's looking good. And then just press firmly and mark all the way down. And this is the reason why I like the ceramic marking pencil, because it marks a really nice fine white line. You can really clearly see it. And you can find both of these marking pencils on my website at leahday.com/mark. So come and check that out. Okay, so now we're ready to start marking our matrix design. This is just a little bit tricky, and it is definitely going to be something you're going to want a ruler just to keep track of where you're at in the design. We're going to start in the middle and work our way out. So what we're going to do is just pick a point anywhere. It doesn't matter where it is. I'm going to pick this one, and then I'm going to look across to the other side, and I'm going to look at the next point. So that's number 1, and then I'm going to bounce over. That's number 2. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to stitch and draw a gently curving line from that point to that point. So again, how I figured that out, just to get started, I started here, I went across the quilt, and that lines me up with this black point right here, and then I bounced up to there. That's number 1 and number 2. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing in the opposite direction. So I'm right here, I'm going to go across, here's number 1, there's number 2. That's where I'm aiming. So draw a gently curving line right over. And so we're forming this beautiful wiggly V shape. And that's what we're going to do with this matrix. And the cool thing is you can pull up thread right here and you'll be able to stitch all the lines all the way down. So now, once we get this to here, what do? Line up your ruler again, go across, then 1, and then here we go, number 2. That's what we're drawing to. And what this is going to do, this is going to leave basically 2 points open within every little wiggly V. So now we can kind of set the ruler aside. We don't need that anymore. Now I'm right here. I can look on the other side and go 1, 2, and I know that's my point. So I'm going to wiggle right up to it. Okay, and it's okay, you know, like that just kind of, it hit a seam and just went a little crazy. That's okay. Grab your eraser, erase it if it doesn't come out perfect. All right, so I'm here. This is where it was. I'm going to count 1, 2, and draw across. So that's the pattern that we're going to be working with. And I know that seems simple, but as you layer more lines, that's what creates our matrix design. Matrix is basically just a wiggly grid. We cover it over the entire quilt. You could stitch it over the entire quilt, or you can stitch it in a section just like this. And by using these piecing lines, these points, we're going to have it nice and evenly spaced. Even if you stitch a crazy, super curvy line, because we're spacing it the way we are, it's still going to end up roughly evenly spaced. Okay, so we've got our baseline. This is our starting point here. We've got those V shapes, those wiggly V shapes marked. Now, how do we turn this into matrix? We're just going to add more V shapes. So we're going to start here. And I know this one's already taken, so I'm going to bounce back 1. So I'm going to wiggle from this one over to this one. If you want to make that a perfect echo, you can. I really like it when it's just kind of its own free-form wiggle. I think that really looks best. And if you want to make this easier to stitch on your walking foot, then keep these curves rather gentle. You know, don't make them too deep. That's what gets tricky whenever you're quilting curving lines, is whenever they get real deep, then you have to stop and reposition your quilt quite a bit to stay on the curve. Okay, now I'm wiggling down. I hope you can see how this is overlapping so nicely and already starting to create a more complex design. There we go. These edges are going to be just a little tricky because, of course, it's cut off. We don't really see the rest of the design. We'll kind of sort that out once we get all of the lines marked. I'm going to shift it over to this side now. Here we go. And I'm going to wiggle over here. Now, what happens if you accidentally, mess it up and it's not right and you're not happy with it? Well, that's what the eraser is for. So don't worry about it. If your lines are off or, it's just not coming out the way you want it to, just erase it, start all over again. That's all right. There we go. So I'm going to wiggle off over there. All right, so now we have one more set of lines, and this one's the most obvious because it's the points that are still left open. So I'm just going to wiggle from point to point, from here all the way across to there, and from here all the way across to there. And that would be one thing if you're using the same pen, to not make your lines too dark. If you're worried about making a mistake, maybe mark it faintly first just to make sure that it's what you want, and then go back in and darken up those lines just so that they're really nice and easy to see. Okay, so over here, I know that I should have something wiggling down and connecting with that point. So that's what I'm going to create. I'm going to just take that line and wiggle it down, connect there, and wiggle off. There we go. That's fixed. That corner looks consistent with everything else. Okay, so we have our matrix marked through this section, and the lines are really simple. I'll show you how to draw some of these. And this is what I'm using to fill in this entire section over the prisms, over the purple and, the rainbow area. And so all I'm doing is lining up the edge of the ruler with all of those points that connect the orange and the red together, just like that. And just draw a straight line right across. Now the edges are a little bit confusing whenever you're stitching like this because you've still got seam allowance. Unless you added a border to your quilt, you will have seam allowance on the edges. So watch. So it's going to go through the purple and off the black right there in that one spot. So that's how you're going to mark all of the straight lines through those sections. Now let's talk about the corners. So here's the corner of our quilt, and of course we're going to lose a 1/4 inch all the way around for our binding. So it's good to start by just marking a little dot about a 1/4 inch from the edge. That's going to be what you aim for to bring all of your lines together to that point. So from there, I'm going to start over here on the purple and just wiggle. This is just going to be right on the edge, just like that. Now I'll kind of echo that. This is a little bit of like wobbly cosmos, the design, but it's also just a little bit like matrix. It's the same kind of curving line that we've been working with already. And you want to keep this rather gentle because as you can see, as you get closer to the edges, you lose a little bit of space here. So I'm going to dip in for this one and then back out again. There we go. So that's the corner marked and that's looking good. I'll just darken up these lines just a bit so that way they'll stay nice and bright and be ready for quilting. So that's it for this quilting tutorial. I hope you learned a lot about quilt marking and you're ready to give this a try. And remember, if you'd like to follow along, all you need is a copy of the book, Explore Walking Foot Quilting with Leah Day. You can find that at leahday.com/walkingfoot. Until next time, let's go quilt.